Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our dialogue, tuning into the hidden stories and conversations. I'm Diana Anderson, and I'm the CEO of Cylient, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation this morning because I think this is just an absolutely essential skill to have, which is to be able to tune into each other's conversations and really hear the hidden story that is guiding the choices that each of us is making. This is a dialogue, so I am really looking forward to having you participate with me today. So if you are comfortable, can you please go ahead and put yourself on screen so that we can see each other? And if you are have got questions as we go along, please feel free to put them into the chat. And I will be watching that and looking to respond to the chat as we go along. And that way we can be learning with and from each other, which is just such an important part of compassion and taking a coaching approach to everything that we do. So let's begin. And let's talk a little bit about why these hidden stories are so important. So when we think about the stories that are guiding each of our choices, I guess what I'd like for you to know is that each of us is living our own story. Okay, so each of us is the hero of our own story. And we're really being guided by what matters most to us. If you think about it, in the choices that you make day to day, or, the direction that you take in your life, the things that you prioritize, in a way, that is a reflection of what matters most to you. And you're really making your best effort to be able to attain those things that are important. And if you're lucky enough to be in a place where you feel well supported, where you feel like you've got the resources that you need, where you feel like you've got opportunities that are going to allow you to excel, then your story is going to be a productive one. All right, you're going to feel, even when you're challenged by something, you're going to feel like you can make progress. And so this is a very productive place to be. And people that tend to be in this place tend to feel like their story is moving along, even if it has challenges. But I also want you to notice that for some people, they don't feel like they've got the things they need to be successful. Maybe they don't feel like they've got the skills or the capability. Maybe they don't feel connected to other human beings, or they don't feel supported in some way. And as a result, what happens is they actually are in a more fearful or non-productive place. They don't feel as confident. And often when they're behaving from this place, they're going to look much more protective. So I want you to just keep in mind that depending on whether we feel productive or protective, our stories are going to play out in a different way. So just to kind of understand how important this is, I'd like to just kind of warm up a little bit and have you think about maybe some people that you might be observing whose story might be a little bit more protective. So maybe people who are feeling a little bit frightened right now. What kind of behaviors are you noticing in others that might indicate that they are frightened? So go ahead and you can put that into the chat, please. I would love to hear just and see some of the things that you feel indicate that others might feel frightened. Because part of being able to discern someone else's story is actually being able to read the cues that they're putting off about what they believe to be true and the experience that they're having as a result of that. So yeah, we're getting some examples coming in here. People might feel distracted. There could be defensive. They might be engaging in verbal attacks. maybe not giving some details or trying to change the subject, blaming, negativity, defensiveness, deflecting. Yeah, so we're hearing and seeing all kinds of behaviors that really indicate that people are living out a protective story. And if you think about it, everything that's going on in the world right now is actually shaking the stories that we are experiencing. So for a lot of us, the story that we had about our world being stable, of us being competent in that stable world, of us having what we need to feel successful is getting blown up. All right. And so whether it's economic instability or whether the news in the world that, how we thought things should be is being challenged, all the changes that the pandemic is creating, even the fact that so many of our interpersonal support structures are either being disrupted or being intensified. So we may not be with the people that help us to feel confident, or we may be spending a lot more time with people that maybe challenge us in ways that it's difficult for us to deal with. And so what I want you to start to notice is the role that fear is playing in the way that stories are playing out. And so let's talk for just a moment about when somebody is faced with a fear, how they actually respond to that fear. And so the first thing that a lot of people do is actually make up stories about other people. So they may take a small little bit of information and create a story about someone else that helps to explain their fear. So an example, and so this is happening a lot right now, by the way, particularly because we are in remote work situations. So we don't have as much data about each other as we used to have because we're not bumping into each other in the hallway, or we're not sitting around in meetings and kind of chit-chatting before and finding out what's going on, or we're not even able to just visually observe each other and determine where people are at. We have the screen of the Zoom lens, we have less frequent meetings, so we have a lot less information, which means that we're taking a lot of little pieces of information and blowing them up into big stories. And so I'm hearing things like, different people on the team feeling like they are being disproportionately asked to do maybe more work or less work, or feeling like they're maybe not being treated as fairly, or people might be having stories that their ideas are not being really honored or their ideas are not moving forward. So I'm curious, how are you seeing things play out in your world right now? What kinds of behaviors are you watching people blow up, maybe into bigger stories than they really are? So if you're living in that kind of world and you're seeing something that's happening, share it with others so that we can start to recognize how people are creating their own stories and the stories that they are having. Again, one of the things, in order to be able to hear these hidden stories, we've got to really tune up our ability to notice how people are responding to the things that are happening around them, so that we can check our own stories that we might be having, that we're telling ourselves about who other. So anybody seeing anything that's happening out in the remote world? Anybody seeing stories that are being told? See, Elizabeth is sharing one. It's really focus on small things to deflect from the important larger conversations. Yeah, that's how I'm seeing it play out. Yeah, at least in the HR realm. Interesting. Yeah, so maybe if we don't want to move into a story that feels fearful, we choose something small or something that feels controllable and give our focus to that. And what we're actually masking is maybe a bigger fear that is happening behind us. So what I just want you to notice that a lot of things are impacting the stories that people are telling themselves right now. And what we want to be able to do is think about how can we actually hear those stories and understand the choices that people are making. And so let's just sit back for a moment and talk about why stories are so important. Okay? So we can hear that we're kind of all making up our stories. Um, what I would tell you is that stories are essential to each one of us as human beings because they are how we make sense of the world. Right? We tell ourselves a story about who we are. We tell ourselves stories about what's happening around us and whether this is threatening to us or not. We also are noticing that the shared story that we all have about how the world works is also something that gives us confidence. And I think one of the greatest challenges we're facing in this moment of time is that all of those stories are simultaneously being challenged, right? Whether it's how your world has changed because of the pandemic, the people around you, how their world has changed, what's happening in your organization, or just looking out and noticing what's happening in the world, there's almost no solid ground for anyone to stand on. And the challenge that we're having right now, individually and collectively, is that when we get stuck in fear-based stories, we act in fear-based ways, and it really limits our ability to respond to what's going on around us. And this is really a shared challenge for all of us. And so the point in being able to hear these hidden stories is really to help people find the places where they have choices, find the places where they can begin to start to write a new, more empowering narrative for themselves so that they can start to get traction and move out of fear and into a place where they can be okay, even while the world is just tumultuously changing around us. And by the way, that's really important to notice because we cannot make the world get solid. We can't get people back to a solid place where they feel more comfortable. Well, all we can do right now is help people shift their story, translate their fears into more productive ways of dealing with the challenges around them, and help them to build the skills to feel a little bit more solid in a world that is moving. So let's talk about how to do that. The first thing that I'd like you to give thought to is how to listen from a place of curiosity. All right, how can you begin by getting curious when you see a behavior that maybe triggers you a little bit, or you hear someone recount a story that makes you angry or maybe challenges your own beliefs or thinking? Let's step back for a moment and move into curiosity. And what we want to get curious about, first of all, is kind of really where is that story coming from? And there's a number of things that we want to give attention to. By the way, the first thing to notice for yourself before you even get there is notice your own reaction to other people's behavior. If you get what we call at Cylient, get caught, which is you immediately flip into telling yourself a story about why that person's bad or doesn't get it or doesn't care, you're not going to be able to hear their story because you're only hearing theirs. So the first thing you want to do is notice when your storyline starts to play, to just catch yourself and go, I'm caught. I'm in my own story. I'm telling myself a story about this person, and just stop. Right, just stop. Notice that it's playing. See what you can do to set that aside and see if you can get curious about where this person's coming from. And here's the first thing I want you to get curious about is what do you think matters most to that person? All right, because remember, if we are all the heroes of our own stories and we're all trying to attain the things that are most important to us, if you can tune into what really matters to that person, you might start to have a deeper appreciation for the storyline that's guiding the choices that they're making. And it's really, really important to remember that each of us cares about something different. Okay, that we're just because maybe you're motivated to be the best does not mean that everybody else around you shares that same motivation. For some people, they just want to maybe feel connected or like they belong. Other people might really want to be making a difference. And for people who are frightened, by the way, often the thing that matters most to them right now is they just want to feel safer. Okay? So notice the first thing, if we're going to start to discern this hidden story, the first thing is what is motivating that story? And how is that contributing to how this person is showing up? The second thing to think about is, what do you think this person might be afraid of, particularly if they are wanting to feel safe? Give some thought to what might be causing them to feel uncertain, or to feel less confident, or to feel disconnected. And the thing to do here is, certainly you can observe behavior, but this is also a great time to invite people to talk with you and share with you what's really going on for them. So again, if you're working remotely with people, sometimes asking people questions that invite them to share a little bit more of their inner dialogue is going to help you get some sense of this. So, sometimes when I'm talking with people, I might ask them what they're finding most challenging these days, or what's maybe concerning them the most about how things are unfolding. Things that are going to help me hear where their attention is gravitating to. And by the way, once someone starts to share what's concerning them, I'm going to want to dig in a little bit more too and understand why it is. What is it about being alone right now that's concerning them? What is it about their job situation in particular that's concerning them? And again, remember that fear is really personal. Right? And it's really, really important that we understand that the fears that people that are experiencing and the things that are coloring the choices that they're making are really things that are wound up in how they see the world. In Cylient, what we would call their worldview. And it's really, really important for people to understand that where those fears came from are actually a production of where that person's life experience has been. All right, so let's just talk about where fears come from for just a moment, because it's really important. I think one of the places, our biggest blind spots collectively as human beings, is our ability to really comprehend what wires up our fears and how we express them. And if all you did from today was just took away a greater curiosity about the kinds of things that make people frightened and how people show up and express their fears, you would be able to operate at a much higher level in everything that you do, and you would become a much more compassionate person, because what you would understand is that most people are walking around with a lot of fear. And we really just need to be able to connect with each other and be compassionate with each other about that and help each other move through these fears. Let's see, I'm starting to see some things that suggest that there's a lack of looking outside of our own fears so we can really listen to what others may need. Yes. If we can't figure out how to get, so I'm reading from the chat, if we can't figure out how to get out of our own heads, we can't help others. Yeah. Exactly. So sometimes understanding where our own fear is coming from can help us be more compassionate about others. So here's what I would tell you, though. One is that we were all raised in really different settings by very different people who had their own fears and probably passed those on to each of us. All right. So each of us have been exposed to a very different kind of environment of fear. There are shared stories that we have been, that shaped who we are. We watched other people deal with fear, our parents or others around us deal with fears in different ways. And so just to understand and start to appreciate that that influences who people are. I guess one of the things I've noticed is that, I've been a coach for 25 years, so I've had the opportunity to really dive deeply into a lot of people's lives. And what I would tell you is that very few of us were gifted with parents that were extremely well adjusted and skilled as parents. it's really uncommon. If you got one of those parents, sets of parents that just were really well adjusted and emotionally intelligent and thoughtful, go and give them a big hug and a kiss on both cheeks. You won the lottery. I would just say a huge number of us grew up with people that were a reflection of the challenges of their parents and the people who came before them. And I think one of the greatest opportunities of our time right now is actually to recognize the costs that individually and collectively we're paying for that, and to use this moment in time to help each other see these fears and build the skills to move through them. I think that's what this time is actually in many ways all about. So give thought to what might be contributing to this person's fear, and how do you think that might be playing out? So if the person's not saying anything, what are they protecting themselves against? If the person is being angry with other people, what might they be really angry about? And look underneath and see what those fears are. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time today talking about all the ways that we can help people transmute those fears into something more productive. In fact, I am going to run our next dialogue and really spend a lot of time talking about how we can help people turn their challenges into gifts. Okay, because there's a lot to consider with that. But what I really wanted to focus on today was helping you actually really just understand why it matters that we tune into these hidden stories, and how to start to discern some of the things that you're seeing, and help you maybe change your story about what is really going on in that situation, so that you can more compassionately hear that story, because that is the foundation to being able to invite someone to change. So as you're noticing these fear behaviors and considering what people might be afraid of, I'd love for you to go into the chat right now and actually share some ideas with all of us about the kinds of things that you feel that people truly are afraid of right now. Like, what are some of those underlying fears that are driving some of maybe the more limiting behaviors that we might be seeing around us? Because I think, again, the more virtuosity that we have in being able to discern fears, the more virtuosity we have in dealing with them. So let's co-educate each other right now. What are some of the things that people are afraid of, and what behaviors are you noticing that are happening as a result of those fears? So let's share some of these things. Yeah, so we've got loss, lack of control, being alone. Yep, the political climate, potential job loss. Yeah, financial insecurity, also loss of connection due to COVID. Yeah, these are all things that people are afraid of. They're afraid of being alone. They're afraid of losing their livelihood. Of being used because they fear consequences to their jobs. Yeah, there's a lot of conversation that's happening right now around fairness and whether people are being kind of used, and whether people are being understood, and whether people are actually in some cases afraid of even speaking out about the kinds of situations they find themselves in, whether they feel completely overtaxed by all the responsibilities that they have, but they don't want to say anything because they are afraid of how that will reflect. Yep, they don't want to look incompetent, but that could result in loss of losing their jobs. Yeah. You can hear that our world is just igniting a lot of fears for people. And so here's what I want you to know is that the key to beginning to shift these stories, first of all, is to be able to understand really what the fear is. And listen very, very carefully so that you have some sense of what that is. And I'm sorry, I'm just reading the chat. We've got some great stuff going. Yeah, fear is unknown. It's not even a new normal at this point. Yeah, that's one of the greatest things I think people are afraid of is they can't find something to settle into. And so what I want you to hear is that the beginning of inviting someone to shift their story, which is where the real power is right now, is how can we help people shift their stories so that they can find more solid ground to stand on within themselves, because they're not going to find it in the world around them for quite some time. And we find solid ground when we can find the places where we have choices. All right, so as you are listening to these fearful stories, what I want you to notice and really tune into is first, is where does the person have choice that's going to help them maybe begin to feel like they are able to at least influence their situation even when they can't control it. And so what's really important to notice is, so maybe the person could be at risk of losing their job, but are there things that they can do in this moment to begin to build their skills so that one, they're really showcasing the best of their abilities, and two, if they do happen to lose their job, that they are building skills that are going to help them or find something new, a new opportunity to move to. If people have got health concerns, where do they have choices about, how they do return to the office or how they do keep themselves safe? Or how can we help people even to be in conversations about addressing some of the fears that they've got? So what I want for you to notice is that these stories that we're creating about our fears are actually really inhibiting a lot of people from being as productive as they can be, and they're actually feeding on themselves and causing more fears. And so one of the first things that we can do is help to shift people towards a more positive kind of story, one that is going to help them see the places where they have choice, and also I think places where they have the opportunity to begin skill. So one of the questions is, how can you help support people when they are in a space where they're feeling frightened? And here's why this really matters right now is all of us are having our stories challenged in a way that is inviting us to learn, to grow, and to be able to connect and create together. And so hearing each other's stories is really, really important as a foundational place to start from. And so what I wanted to do right now is actually shift to some of the questions that people sent in. And hopefully some of them I've tried to address in what I've been sharing with you so far. And what I'd like to do now is actually talk about some of the questions that came up that were sent in preparation for this. And feel free, by the way, to also put your questions into the chat, either about what I'm talking about or if there's something you would like to see me address. I'd be happy to do that. So one of the first ones is someone wrote in that they have a manager who frequently makes assumptions about what her peers are doing and suggests that they don't work as hard as she does. And this person was wondering, so that's a person's story. I am working harder than everybody else. And so the question was how to begin to address this. And again, the first thing I would do is invite you to actually hear what's underneath that story. That's the story you're hearing. If we're going to hear the hidden story, the first thing I would do if I heard someone complaining in this way was, instead of being angry or annoyed or getting into my story about how everyone's got challenges, I would be inviting this person to tell me a little bit more about what's going on for them, why they believe, what's causing them to believe this. So I would just invite them to say, tell me more about that. What are you observing? What are you seeing? And what I'm trying to discern is there a hidden fear that's sitting underneath of this story that maybe this person's going to get judged badly because they feel like they have more responsibility. They're going to be having a harder time to attain the kinds of outcomes that are expected. Maybe they feel like that's putting them at risk. Do you hear how that would be a really different story if I'm at risk because other people are not stepping up right now? We're going to help someone address that in a very different way than the complaint. Oh, more is being expected of me. So it's really important that when we hear someone's story, that we take the time to get underneath and hear what's really driving it. Let me just take a look here. Heather's just saying, if all we do is tell people why they're wrong in their perceptions before we have them get into conversations, they shut down and are less likely to share what's real, the real whys. Oh yeah, fantastic point, Heather. Thank you for making that. Yeah, and isn't that instinctively what we often do? As soon as we hear someone complain or share something that we don't believe, the first thing we want to do is argue. And you're exactly right, Heather, it's going to cause everyone to close down and our ability to influence the story is gone, which is why, again, we want to move into the curiosity. We want to understand and it's almost always an underlying fear. Here's what I want you to know, by the way, when you are observing behavior that either you can't make sense of or seems really illogical to you, one of two things, or possibly two things, is happening. One, the person is afraid, all right, and the behavior you're observing is an expression of that. Or you may have a mental health issue that is at play, which can be exacerbating the fear. But either way, when you can't make sense of something, you're exploring one or two of those areas. Obviously, if it's a mental health issue, it's not something that we can address directly, but we can encourage people to get the support that they need to be able to move back into a more functional space. And I would tell you again, all of the change that's happening around us is really exacerbating people's mental health issues. I mean, I think a lot of people's mental health is really being challenged right now. And sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do is encourage people to get some support for that in an appropriate way. Okay, so let's see, we've got another question. How do you explore the situation when the person may not be entirely aware themselves of what is driving a particular fear and cannot name it? Yeah, this is really true. Again, thanks, Heather. That is a fantastic point in that we don't know what our fears are. Okay, often our fears actually masquerade as anger. Because we might not want to address our own fear. And so we tell ourselves a story that causes us to be angry with other people. And so again, the trick is to listen really carefully. There's one point I would tell you right now that might be helpful. If you're not familiar with the work of Carol Dweck, I would encourage you to take a look at that. And she has done work on mindsets. And so there's really basically two kinds of mindsets. There's fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. And these are really playing out into how people are responding to challenges right now. So just really broadly and simply, people who have a growth mindset are people who believe that their ability comes from their opportunity, or that they have the ability to change, to respond, to address a challenge in a meaningful way. All right, and so they feel like they're always growing. People who have fixed mindsets have the belief that whatever abilities that they were born with, that's it, that's all they've got. And they will then, so then their real fear becomes feeling inadequate, feeling like they're being judged, feeling like they're not good enough, and they will defend themselves really strongly when they feel challenged in that way, because they don't have the ability, or they don't believe that they can grow through the challenge that they've got. All right. And so when you're dealing with someone who's got a fixed mindset, the ability to change is going to be slower. And the opportunity is really to reacquaint them with the idea that they actually can be safe when they're growing. And actually, in some cases, relearning how to learn. So we'll get into more of that when we talk next time in the next dialogue. But I want you to be aware that there are those two mindsets out there, which might account for sometimes why you get a really different reaction from one person versus another. Let's see, someone's saying, I love this saying, you can't direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails. Yeah, that's great. And there's a lot of adjusting, a lot of tacking we need to do right now to help people refine the wind in their sails. And I think that actually is where compassion and coaching comes in right now, is helping people find where they have, when people feel that they have choice, that's what puts wind back in their sails. And even if we can just get a little wind in by helping people see where they have choices to address the things that are concerning them, that's where we can help people start to shift even a little bit out of these limiting fear stories and into something more positive. Let's see. Okay, so I think that we've addressed most of that. There was a couple of other questions that came up. One of them was asking how to remain objective. I think we've talked about that one. Let's see. Somebody asked how to change a story if someone has a story about you. And if you notice that somebody has a story about you that seems limiting, what are the things that you can do to help people maybe change their story about you? And I think this is particularly important in our new Zoom world and remote world, because it's so easy to create stories about other people when we don't have as much experience with them. So one of the things that I would tell you to do is, we often judge people by their intentions, all right? And we tend to judge ourselves by our intentions and other people by their actions. And so I know I have a good intention, so even if the action doesn't look great, I feel like, you should appreciate me because my intentions are good, even if you can't see them. So I think one of the most powerful things that we can be doing right now is actually like vocalizing our intentions. I'm saying this because I feel like this is important. My hope is that this is the outcome that we're going to attain. Here's what really concerning me about this. This is what I would like to see happen. Speak those intentions now. All right, we really have got to be putting them out into the world and leaving less to other people's imaginations and stories. Again, the more fearful we are, the bigger the lens that we have to kind of look through, the more people are going to misinterpret behaviors. So speak to your intentions. Speak to the positive too, by the way. When you see positive things happening, articulate them. When something good happens, celebrate it. When someone does something nice, acknowledge it. It's like, let's find the positive stuff here. It's happening all around us. It just might be like little seeds of things, all right? Don't wait for the big, celebration at the end. The more that we notice and acknowledge and appreciate the positive things, either that other people are doing, the things that are happening, when it's about our own story, the more positively people will feel about us. And two, it gives us an opportunity to start to shift the collective story. And I think that's going to help people to feel better. Let's see, how do we deal with clients when they, I just lost that one. I'm sorry, I'm reading from the chat again. How do we deal with clients when they close off the choices, when they indeed have very few choices. Yeah. I think one of the greatest things that we have to acknowledge, so I guess when we look at choice, there's a few things to know. One is we almost always have some choice, even if the choice is just how to respond to something. And how we respond to something can greatly impact, you know, our ability to tap into our own resources. So even just helping people stay in a more positive mindset is going to give them more access to whatever resources they have got internally and externally. But yes, here's the thing is sometimes the choices are just too scary. It's just terrifying for people. You can see they have a choice, but the act of making that choice is terrifying. We have to honor that. Sometimes if what we can do is make the choice smaller or help people make one little step, especially if you've got someone with a fixed mindset, helping them make one small step in a positive direction could be huge. It's starting to challenge their story, all right, that they can't change. And that's a big story to challenge. So sometimes what might feel like a really small step to someone who has a growth mindset is a huge step for someone with a fixed mindset, and we need to honor that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what we have to honor is that everyone's making their own choices and having their own experiences, and that we don't always, you know, that is personally my belief is that when we are in a coaching mindset or a guiding mindset, our job is to illuminate choices and support people to move into the choices that they make, and to honor that sometimes people will not or cannot make that choice. And that's not on you, but if you illuminated the choice and gave them the option or the support that I need to move forward, then we have to be at peace that that's what we've done. Let's see, I've got another question. I have a tenured employee that every time I attempt to ask questions and find a comfortable coaching relationship, I get very short answers and that she doesn't need my help with anything. When I try to dig in, I just continue to get nothing. I am her new leader, and she is very against, or it seems that way, to create buy-in. She views any coaching as I got you. It feels as well as an I got you. Let's see. Again, even though we're asking about how she'd like to be coached, she says nothing. That sounds like a very, very frightened person. Sounds like a really frightened person. So I think the first question I would ask myself is, how can I help to make this person feel safe in my presence? So rather than looking for information, I would ask, how can you begin to help that person feel safe around you? And it may just be sharing your intention to be helpful to that person. It might be acknowledging things that the person does well, or acknowledging good intentions that you see. Safety is always first. All right, we cannot coach until people feel safe in our presence. And not feeling safe, the thing to do is don't take it personally. It may have absolutely nothing to do with you. It may be that this person just feels so frightened by everything that's going around that even the act of trying to trust you is too much. And so it's, how do we cultivate trust? And maybe that might actually be something good to put into the chat right now. Is what are things you guys have done to help cultivate trust with others so that they're willing to work with you? Are there things you've done that you've seen work really well that you think others might consider? Yeah, let's see. I find that putting all agendas aside and just being curious with the person helps them to open up. Yeah, sometimes it takes a few questions and them to respond, to let the guard down. Yeah. Let's see, you can't have a productive conversation. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Trust is everything, and it's hard for people right now. So for people to really share their story with you and for you to really comprehend the story, trust is essential. So take a look at the chat because people are giving you some really nice ideas on things they can do. Be consistent, maintain integrity in how you interact with them. Consider giving it first. Open up, be vulnerable. Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things I'll start to do if I want people to trust me is share some of the edges where I'm growing, where I might have concerns. I'll speak to what's concerning me about something so that they understand that we're in this together, all right? They're not the only one who has fear. And so share some things because trust is everything for people right now. Somebody asked how to deal with cultural sensitivities or ignorance in an edgy conversation that might offend somebody. Here's what I would tell you is you can only, you can't exceed the bounds of trust. All right, if your conversation is so edgy that it goes beyond the bounds of trust, then that conversation is going to get shut down. So we've got to constantly be pushing that boundary of safety, and we create it again by acknowledging that we hear and see the truth of other people. By the way, that doesn't mean that you buy into it or that you agree with it. But that whole concept of I see you and I can have compassion for the choices that you are making is the foundation of trust. All right, when people feel seen and heard and not judged, all right, they're going to begin to let their guard down. But you should know that some people have been beaten up so badly for so long and taken advantage of when they were vulnerable that is an incredible act of courage to let someone actually see them. Acknowledge that, all right? And have great compassion for someone who is dealing with that as a beginning place, all right? So let me just go ahead and kind of wrap some ideas up here and say that I think our ability to hear each other's stories and to compassionately respond to them is an absolutely essential skill right now. That it is first and foremost the foundation of helping people find some sense of balance in this very, I don't want to use the word uncertain, a world that is just moving very quickly and is going to keep moving very quickly for quite some time. So helping people find some sense of balance is job one. Job two is going to be helping us connect and create together to start to build what comes next. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next dialogue. But it all begins with our ability to hear the story. By the way, we individually have stories, we collectively have stories. All of these stories are moving. If you or your organization are having challenges hearing each other's stories, reach out to us because this is what Cylient does. We help your people get the skills that they need to be able to truly hear and appreciate each other as the foundation for building a new collective shared story. And I believe that that is the challenge that we collectively are facing right now. And I think the more of us that are compassionately engaged in doing this in a productive way, the more quickly we're going to navigate this change, the greater benefit we can realize from it, and the more we can create a world that's going to really work well for all of us. So if there's anything that we as Cylient can do to help you with that, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to be in that conversation. And I hope you'll continue to connect with us through these dialogues because this is one of our efforts to help people gain the skills that they need to be a positive contribution in this really crazy world that we find ourselves in, but one that's full of opportunity. So I hope you'll tune in November when we'll continue this discussion. Thanks so much. Bye for now.